Welcome to the Porch. I'm Lindsay Baccardo, keynote speaker and virtual presenter for organizations who want to build strong, multi-generational, heart-centered teams. I personally believe that the modern leader has a moral obligation to grow themselves personally and professionally and lead others from a grounded and healthy and healed place. So you're going to hear me bring on psychologists, which we had in December, neuroscience expert Ann is here with us today, storytellers, emotional intelligence researchers, really anything that helps you and I grow as leaders, personally and professionally, that ultimately impacts the culture of their organization, of your organization. That's who I want to bring on. I want to help us grow in little bits every month. And so here's what 2020 taught me. Relationships are truly non-negotiable. And Ann is somebody who's on my team because, like anyone else, we can all get a little frayed, a little wonky, and I am no exception to that at all. Ann would know. Sometimes I just like to get on the phone and yell with her about things that are bothering me. But if you don't know Ann yet, she is the co-founder of BeAbove Leadership. You've got to check out what she's doing. She's an international speaker. The first time I saw her speak, I just sat there like this. And then I stalked her after and was like, you will coach me. What does that mean? I don't know. Tell me everything about who you are. She's an awesome trainer. She really is at the intersection of neuroscience coaching and human transformation. Ann is the type of coach where I will bring something to her that feels completely impossible to navigate, overwhelming, and she will give me just a metaphor so that I can hold space for whatever's bothering me. And all of a sudden, clarity comes like that. So what I love about Ann is that she's not just going to talk from a science perspective. She also comes with an artistic background. And I've asked Ann today if she would open with a poem that she just published a few days ago. And I think it's so appropriate for these times. And first, thank you so much for being here. You know how much I love and adore you. And I'm so excited for everyone who's here today with us to hear from you. Would you share with us this poem that we were just talking about? It's a sign of the time. It's a perfect one. It's actually called In This Time. I'll leave it to you to read it.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for such an awesome introduction. I just feel so filled up and seen, and it's just always fun hanging out. And the people that you gather around you are awesome. So I will read this poem. Poetry for me is a way that I process a lot of things. And what I really love about it is because it works in this land of metaphor, it helps me process things in a nonlinear way. And sometimes what's happening with me and with us, there isn't like a linear answer. There isn't like, go do this, but there's more of a, as you said, like a metaphor that can help me understand it, help me kind of, grok it, kind of old science fiction word. So this is a short. Yeah. In this time, I haven't read this out loud before, so I'll use my sheet.
Here we go.
I wonder, are we meant to be oak trees, staunch and solid and strong, branches steady and roots deep? Or embrace the gentler presence of the rose, bestowing our fragrance of love upon the troubled world? One seems too rigid, and the rigid can be broken sharply. The other vulnerable, and the vulnerable can be lost. Perhaps this time requires us to stand like the sacred willow, flexible and dancing, but never forgetting or abandoning our committed connection to the soil that sustains us all. So that was written last week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is this element that you're talking about, and I see it. We hear it in each other. We see it in each other where we want to have like firm steadiness, and yet the world is making it hard to be that way all the time, or be really gentle and let everything wash over us. So this metaphor of how can I be both rooted and flexible? It's a great analogy for an organization, for a leader to think about. How do I work with people? How do I stay principled, but also gently engage with other people and bend to them? I'm curious, what was on your mind as you were writing this?
I think to go there, and this does lead into the organization stuff, it's the tolerance of evil. And that sometimes people in the world where we're wanting to connect to our heart and we're wanting to grow spiritually, whatever that means to you, develop, that we want to just come from love and tap into that. And then things happen, like happened in the US last week, and you're just like, oh my God, insert swear word. And so this question of, I don't want to meet force with force. I'm learning, that's not the game I want to play. And yet, if I only sort of, respond like the rose and sort of, emit my fragrance and hope that all will be well, that may not be sufficient either. And so to me, the willow is like an integrated metaphor. It has the gentleness of the rose, but it's not going anywhere. And for me as a leader, that's the kind of leader I want to be. I want to be empathetic, understanding, but also stand for something. So that's the roots. And then somebody asked me, well, what is the soil that connects us all? And I thought, that's a really good question. Lindsay, do you know what is that soil? What would that be? What might that be?
That's a great question. I wonder what other people would think that the soil would be too. Right in the chat. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
When I read it originally, I was thinking about the companies that I work with. They're always forward thinking. The CEOs are progressive. And I watch leaders have to live in the reality that businesses make money, and that's what keeps them alive. And so when I think about the soil and put it in the context of our conversation today, I think about, the reality of what it takes to keep a willow tree alive. It does need water. It can't just have good thoughts. Willow trees tend to be by rivers, they need water, they need soil. There is substance to existence. There is substance to a company doing well. And, sometimes, and I've seen this in forward-thinking companies, they almost feel the pressure to become a not-for-profit, like completely not care about money. But really what it is multiple bottom lines. We still have to care about the reality of staying in business. And at the same time, can we love people? Can we be a place of connection and empathy? Can we be both? So that was a lot of conversation.
I love that. And there's so many threads that I want to pick up. And then Becky Gleason is saying, and that's the thought that was just coming to me, like, maybe values, like some kind of shared values, or, like, what is it to be a decent human? And that's not a new conversation.
That's right.
That's not like the 2021 version of being a good human. I am sorry. There are some principles that go back to time immemorial of what it means to be a decent human. So this isn't like kind of up for grabs. But, one of the things that I, just wanted to build on in what you're saying about sort of we need to be a stand for something, but we also need to be open, loving, empathetic, is I think about that, I love to use the term consensus reality, sort of which I often find, you and I've talked about it. It's like, really the emperor has no clothes and everybody's sitting around going, what a beautiful robe. Look at that. But consensus reality says you have to pick people or profits. Nice guys finish last, la, la, la. Well, the research doesn't bear that out. That ain't the truth. The emperor has no clothes. The people or profits view is a lie. And one of my books of the year, and I'll put it in the chat, that I love, that others might be interested in, is called Dying for a Paycheck.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it. It's so good. And it's by a guy, Stanford Business School professor named Jeffrey Pfeffer, P-F-E-F-E-F-E-R. But if you just look him up, he's awesome. And basically what he did is he looked at the research around, this is the Porch, so I guess I can swear. So if anybody's offended, sorry. But he looked at the research around being an asshole company.
What does it take to be an asshole? We should start there today.
Totally. Like, is that Noelle? Thank you. Noelle's giving me a little thumbs up. I love it. And Samantha put a link in. You are awesome. So, so great having a team. So basically what he found is that old view that, tough, fast, push people. Life is speed, make them work hard. If you can, Amazon comes in not well at all. And there's sort of a view, like if you work at Amazon, like if you can't take the culture, something's wrong with you. But what he found is it was costing them millions, if not billions of dollars. Costing them. Being an asshole is expensive.
That is what we should all take away from this.
There's the bottom line for today.
Really? I can see that though. If you are grinding a human down to their bones, that is not a good place to be emotionally, spiritually. Dying for a paycheck, you got to check it out.
Yeah, it's not effective. It's not. And, they asked him, I saw it, if you just look him up, he's got a lot of interviews out there, which is how I first got cued into the book. And in one of the interviews, I don't remember which one, it might've been in Fast Company. They asked him, like, what did you learn? What surprised you about, doing this book and doing this research? And he said, two things. One is that even with all the research, companies didn't care. And it's way worse than he thought. I know, jaw drop, mic drop, boom.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Yikes. So it's so important that, there's this one side where we can, for company culture, we can ring the alarm bells and say, you're missing it. This is costing you. This is bad. This is morally probably, you have to live with yourself treating people like this. That's one end. But the other end is this aspirational side, which we're going to talk about, because how do we get a vision for treating people as they really are? I know this, humans are emotional beings who sometimes think.
I haven't heard it put quite that way, but I really like that. I like it. Rather than the view that we're thinking beings who sometimes have an occasional emotion, which you might be able to talk about or not. I love that. Emotional beings who sometimes think. That's brilliant.
So here we are, and we're supposed to work together and have objectives and strategies. And even, I'm so excited to hear from the neuroscience perspective of this. Just why does that even matter? Let's go to the aspirational side. Why does paying attention to the heart and the human in that heart, why is that so critical?
Why does that matter? Why is it so critical? I mean, there's a number of different answers. I'm going to go to the one that's top of mind first, but there's lots more. But one of the very first ones that I think about is we have to think about stress. And stress is something that we're living with constantly. And it's actually a neutral term. It doesn't always mean bad. Sometimes that extra stress of having a deadline can make you really creative, right?
Yes.
It's not bad, right? But we are, as human beings in 2021, we are under stress. I think it's fair to say that our systems were never really designed for. We were designed long periods of time, hanging out in the sun, laughing, cooking, beating, stuff like that. And then occasionally a lion comes by and freaks us all out.
Yeah.
And then we calm down again, right? I mean, that's a little bit too broad, but we are not, we're not built for 7 emails, all kind of with stressful things that you have to deal with, right? Or, even traffic, which we don't have as much in COVID, but the uncertainty of COVID, all of that, we're not really designed for that. Right. So all of that is by way of saying that the number one way we manage stress effectively is with each other. We're designed for that. We are designed to look for regulation from another human. There are other ways to manage stress, but that is a human being's favorite, most deeply in our DNA and in our personal experience. If you think about when you're a little kid and you have a bad dream or whatever, if you've got a decent parent, now many of us maybe didn't, but if you've got a good enough parent and you have a bad dream, they'll come in with, sweetie, it's okay. There aren't really any monsters, and they'll stroke you. It's like like we need to be petted.
Yeah. Are we basically dogs? Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. The nervous system needs to recover. And the cost to companies around not focusing on relationships is a couple of things. One is that when you don't have that system to recover, because you don't have people you trust in your, in your workspace, you can't come back. And I'll talk about the impact on the brain when you are too stressed. The other part is that you're more likely to get stressed in the first place. So Lindsay, for example, a really practical example, you and I have a long-term relationship. I absolutely trust you. I absolutely know you care deeply about me. If you were to say to me, hey, Anne, I watched your latest video, and as a speaker, would it be okay if I told you a couple of things I thought you could do better? I'd be like, yeah, because I totally think you're the bomb and an amazing speaker, and I would love anything you told me, because we are in relationship. And your feedback to me or your sharing with me does not occur as a threat. It occurs in a different context. If we don't have solid relationships in place, the minute somebody comes in and says, hey, can I tell you something about what you said in that meeting? We are on alert. We're on threat alert. If we're on threat alert, First of all, we're probably not going to hear what that person has to say. Secondly, we're probably not going to be very productive the whole rest of the day.
Yeah.
Let me pause there. That was a long
That's
kind of
right.
thing. Tell me what.
That's right, though. So it is like we perform better under some stress with safe relationships.
Yeah.
It's both.
Yeah.
You've got to have that.
Safe relationships help us sort of moderate that stress.
Yes.
And have it be, there's I like this idea of that, like, there's three kinds of stress. There's sort of stimulating stress when you're like, ooh, I've got to get that done by tomorrow. Let me really dig in. And that's kind of fun, right?
Yeah.
And then there's tolerable stress. So for me, like, any kind of feedback generally comes in the tolerable stress because I want to be perfect.
We're doing this. Yeah.
Right. But, if it's somebody that I'm in relationship with and I, have a history with, that's probably in the tolerable. And then there's toxic, where our bodies and our nervous system is giving us a biochemical reaction, which, number one, has an impact on many parts of the brain in terms of, you talked about focus, in terms of what the body's trying to do when we experience toxic, what we process as toxic stress, everybody's different, is it's trying to narrow our focus so we can just deal with that. And that might feel like fight, flight, freeze, fawn is another response. We might go into that, but it's not going to keep our brain in the most open and creative place, because what it wants to do is keep us alive. Yes.
So you've got this experience. So everything that we're seeing right now, say last night, I thought, it's 8:00. This is a great time to watch behind the scenes footage of storming the Capitol. This is great, and then exactly. You just did it right there.
Yeah.
So I subjected myself to what now looking back is toxic stress potentially, right? Because then I couldn't get out of this mode of, am I okay? Am I safe? Am I okay? Am I safe?
Right.
Is that right?
I think that's right. I think that's a really good and very visceral example. And, one of the things that I've shared is I've been training for 20 years, probably over 20 years. I've never canceled a class because of illness or because of anything going on. I didn't happen to be teaching on 9/11. That would have caused it. But I canceled a class Wednesday night because I was in that window of my brain, and everyone, even the students who weren't in the US, like, they were in that place of, I'm overwhelmed.
Yes.
Now, here's an interesting thing. So time and context can depend. Like, we might find, for example, that 6 months from now, pretty much everyone who was involved in that was prosecuted, appropriately sentenced. There have been major changes. I'm getting chills because this is my vision. We're in a major, there have been new policies. There's been kind of reparations. People have apologized. That may happen down the line, in which case you may find that viewing that footage would occur in the window of tolerable stress.
It could move. It could
move. It could also be different for everybody. For some people, that might have been stimulating stress. They might have found, like, I am so actually inspired to go do something, this is not stressing me out. It is stimulating me. It's different per person. It's different in terms of the bigger context that we're holding it in. It's different in terms of our own personal history. I think it was harder for many people who had come out of abusive relationships to watch that than maybe people who didn't have that personal history. It's triggering, you know.
So that's important too, to never to consider as a leader, somebody's entire background is shaping how they're perceiving this.
Right. I love
So
that you
if
brought
you were,
back leadership. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh no, please go ahead.
Well, I just love that you brought it back to leadership. And keep saying what you're saying. Someone's entire background will shape how they see anything, from feedback to a strategic plan to a promotion. Every part of who they are will come with that.
Yep. My whole family on my dad's side, they are all firefighters and policemen. So when I've seen, you know, in my hometown in Rochester, New York, it was Christmas Eve 3 or 4 years ago now, firefighters were called to a house fire and shot and killed. And then when I see things like this, it really, because of my own background, sends me into a bit of a tailspin. And it's my unique story. Somebody else, you know, I can imagine everyone, something different visual was a trigger for them. And I've been watching leaders to wrestle with how do I stay the willow tree? How do I stay rooted in our values? How do I continue to grow and evolve and be strong, but also flexible and move with the wind and really be able to listen to everyone that's on my team and not take for granted what they may be experiencing because of this.
Yeah. And not feel, I mean, there's two things that I want to say. One is a research that I would say around the effectiveness of being a willow tree. And I want to loop back to that because of what that says and tell you about a research study. But this, now I lost my train of I'll just say about the research. I cannot clearly hold two things in my brain at once. So we'll just talk about the research study. So thinking about, like, why would you want to be the willow tree? Well, in terms of what we understand about the brain, what will happen for you as a leader if you are more of the willow tree? And that means what that means is you have a stand for something. You can look at the details, you can hold the bottom line. I mean, this is roughly. And you also can be flexible and open and empathetic. And so this is a fascinating research study. What they basically looked at is, well, what happens if you have more of the leader who's more of, in our language, we'll say the oak tree. Like, this is the way it's going to go. And you need to line up, and I've got the vision, follow me, command and control.
Yeah.
Leader who is basically saying, well, I worked for a nonprofit, and the leader I worked for was kind of like this. Well, let's involve all the stakeholders. Let's find out what every single person thinks and make sure that it's okay. Absolutely everyone. And
let's really listen. Yeah.
Let's really be careful that we're not offending anybody and everybody's heard and all of that. So we might say that's the rose. And in terms of brain scan, what they did, and I think this is a brilliant study model, what they did is they looked at, like, if this was the team, Kristen and Lexi and Janelle and Kelly and Kelsey and Lance, and you're all on my team, we're going to scan your brains. And we're going to say, think about Anne. Think about a recent, I think this was the methodology. Think about a recent interaction with Anne, a leadership interaction that you had as a team member. And then what we're going to look for is, what's the brain patterning? What seems to be the brain flow, the blood flow in the brain? And here is what they found. Oh, and then we're going to scan the leader's brain, and we're going to see kind of what are the indications of sort of what their tendencies tend to be. So what they found is that either with an oak tree leader or with a rose leader, what you had is, in the team, Lexi and Lance and Kelly and Kristen, what's happening in your brain is if I'm too oak tree or too rose, you're going to have a tendency to be more in an away state, to be less engaged, to have areas associated with emotional openness, learning, creativity, probably less active, maybe shut down. You're going to be a little more flatline. With a willow leader who's both, who's like, I want to hear everybody's point of view. Thank you very much. Let's go. Let's go here. Right.
Yes.
What you're going to have is Kristen and Lexi and Kelly and Lance, you're going to be in this toward state. You're going to be like, if I'm that kind of leader, you're going to be more emotionally open, more tuned into me, more available. You're going to have less flatline in your brain and more firing. So what do we want in a team? We want the team's brains to be engaged. How do you do that? Don't be too weak and don't be too strong, I guess. Be integrated.
Be that Willow.
Yeah.
Because that is true of humans. There is, like, to your point, this idea of integration. And I think for leaders, this is part of our journey as leaders too, is integrating our life so that we can also do that inside of our organization.
Yeah, do it for ourselves. And I think this is one of the things that stops organizations, and maybe a really good message to organizations is when we talk about relationships and having someone who's paying attention to the relational aspect of the relational needs of the organization, whatever you've thrown around, like you've got some titles for that. I know that.
Yep. Like Chief People Officer, Chief Heart Officer. Yeah. I think those roles, as somebody who works with Gen Z and millennials, every company in the next decade will have somebody who plays this role of the willow tree, who understands strategy, who understands the importance, like we need to make money to stay alive, and who can listen and flex. And ultimately all leaders could be that way, maybe, but it's a lot for everyone to be there. But I think of somebody like Claude Silver or Adam Weber, who are playing these Chief Heart Officer, Chief People Officer roles to help bring an organization to center, to not be too much either way.
I love that. And a couple of things that I just want to add to that. One is, you said they need to understand strategy, so they need to be on the leadership team. You cannot isolate them off somewhere just doing their thing. They need to see how it impacts, and they need to understand, the bottom line as well. So that's really clear. The other thing, I was recently talking to a friend who is a DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think I might be missing an initial there, but at any rate, y'all know. And basically, wanting to bring that more forward in our company. And basically the company's saying, oh, I think we can just do this ourselves. Why do we need somebody to do that? And, our reaction, hers and mine, were because it won't happen. Because unless somebody has that as their, what do they call it? KRAs? Was that right? Key responsibility areas. Oh my God, my corporate speak is not up to date, but like key areas of responsibility. Yes. It doesn't happen organically. Why? Because the stress and the immediacy of what's happening right now and the pressure of profits, all of that will supersede it. And people will say, we can't do that this month. We'll get to it next month. And unless you have to be holding that line, next month never comes. Because there's always right.
So what I hear you saying is that the pressure and the immediacy of a business, of an organization, supersedes the heart, supersedes, maybe your emotional long-term wellness.
Right. Unless somebody is holding that and saying, and I think part of the key message, and maybe part of the fear is, I think it's an unreasonable fear. The research doesn't bear it out, but the fear can be, well, if we go to the heart, we'll lose our edge. It's kind of like, that's what makes us who we are. We're tough, we're hard, we're fast. I've known a number of organizations like that. And if we do that, we will become soft. Therefore, we'll lose our competitive edge, we'll lose our profitability. And I think the key message is saying the time that we're moving into is we need to start understanding complexity outside of polarity. Right? So this polarity thinking of either we're tough and profitable or we're soft and nice and, we will lose everything. I think that's the fear that keeps companies from making this a priority. right?
That makes sense because we deal with that with high achievers. I just did a talk today for IU where we were talking about high achievers and leaders who tend to be really hard on themselves, even individually, because you think, I got to be hard on myself. I got to grind or else I'll get lazy. And the
Yeah.
third way, the Willow way, is really interesting. The third way is really, I can actually show compassion towards myself and be wildly productive. I can be
Totally.
gentle and I can still drive behavior. I can do both. And I do think that takes a level of self-awareness, personal growth, self-acceptance. And I think you're right. That's where that chief people officer, that chief heart officer belongs, because you really do need a presence there to continue to help a company reorient to that over and over and over again, to not
Yeah.
forget it. It's not an initiative. It's not a one-time class on empathy or listening. It's truly a way of being.
Yeah, you're making me think of, I was just talking to one of my friends who's a real expert on self-care. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things she was saying is that one of the hardest messages to get across is self-care isn't this thing that you do one day a week or a week a year, or, you go to a
Yeah.
spa, right? But it is a
Yes.
way of, it has to be, for it to work, it has to be a way of life. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, this all maybe comes down to trusting people, because here is what I know, that when people are in that place, we call it the Goldilocks spot, not too little,
Yep.
not too much, just the
That's
right
right.
amount of stress. So, and what it takes to create just the right amount of stress in an employee, in a team, is you want to make sure they have things that are juicy. They have things that are a little stimulating. They have work that's a little out of their reach that they have to grow in order to do. But they're doing it in a way that is not like they're going to get slammed if they do it wrong, where there's room to make some mistakes. There's psychological safety, which came
Yes.
out big time in the famous Google study, Project Aristotle. We have to have psychological safety. Then you've got a team where, where you're saying, what's your growing edge? Where do you want to cross train? Like, what else? But at the
Yes.
same time, they're working within, they're not getting pushed over the curve where the stress chemicals are flooding them and they can't even think. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the jobs I think of, like a chief heart officer, is looking to see, are people stimulated? Are they being well used? Are they appreciated? And at the same time, are they not so flooded with demands that they lose their ability to focus? Because that's what will happen. On either side of this curve, you become less effective.
Ooh,
So
yes.
part of my management is I'm always trying to manage my curve. So I'm stimulated but not stressed, because any work that I produce in the too stressed part will be harder to do and will not be as good quality.
That is, I
Isn't that
really want to
interesting?
drop the F-bomb right then. Just gonna be careful with that one because I'm on LinkedIn. But that's it. And I wonder too, as we are working from home, I wonder how many of us are still working from home. I am mostly. There's days where we had to my team had to get back together because I said, I'm gonna lose my hair on this. My hair is turning gray. Like I'm not gonna be able to handle the stress of all of this. I feel, I already lost a tooth during COVID from who knows what. So I'm like, I'm falling apart. It's too much. And really what you're talking about is I had to rearrange how I managed my energies so that some days I wasn't like, I'm doing 3 keynotes, I'm answering emails, I'm calendaring, I'm overstressed, I'm so stressed I can't keep up with myself. And then other days where I'm aimless, I have nothing,
Right.
so I don't really know what I have to do. So it's really our job all of a sudden too, and maybe to train our team how to manage their stress curve.
Yes. And then, Sam, if you go to yourcoachingbrain.wordpress.com, that's my blog. There's a blog in there called The Goldilocks of the Brain. And if you take a look,
Yes.
that's a nice one to maybe put in the chat, because it talks about the research, why this is validated by research. And I
Yeah.
just found it so helpful. Yeah. And I think in COVID, one of the things that I've been seeing is, I feel like you are so quick. Sam is like,
Boom.
she's like Mercury. She's
Yep.
man, fast fingers.
That's
That was
right.
awesome. I think in COVID has us, I like to say, kind of on both sides of the curve, where there are things that are just hard to process. And one of the things that's most stressful to humans is feeling out of control and not knowing what to predict. So there
Yes.
we go. On the other hand, life for many folks, because we don't have the normal things we would do just for fun or, stimulation, even going out to eat, we're not doing that anymore in New Mexico. You don't maybe have as much of the stimulating side of stress. So we have to kind of pay attention in
Isn't
terms of
that
our mental
interesting?
health to both sides, right?
That's interesting. Yes. So even giving, I just wonder too, for those of us who have teammates, just giving them this framework, even using your blog or the Yerkes Dodson principle. I think that's the principle that you're talking about with the Goldilocks idea. Just even Googling that and bringing it to your team and saying, how can we keep you at a stress threshold that's appropriate? Where do you need some novelty and some interest? Where do you need some steadiness?
Yeah.
And I think that's where that chief people officer, chief heart officer becomes really important, because they're tuning into the way that humans operate.
I love that. It's such a, it's not the question that anybody ever asks, which is
Mm-hmm.
like, what do you need in order to be stimulated but not overwhelmed? And
Yes.
you might be right. It was originally discovered as a principle, and then the researcher is a woman named Amy Arnsten out of Yale, and she looked at the chemical aspect. But people intuitively knew that there was a U curve of stress. Like that's
Yes.
known before the research came out. So I think you're right on for sure on that. But I do think, it's something that I think is if you've got a team where there's some psychological safety and people feel safe, I think drawing a big curve on the whiteboard or flip chart, and if you're in person, obviously, or maybe, however you do it, and saying, let's all talk about where are we? And
Yes.
we're there. What do we need? What do we need from each other in order to go back here?
Yes.
Sometimes working alone and working for myself, sometimes what I need at 3:00 after I've had led a couple of classes or something, I need to meditate right then, because otherwise, and if I do that, what I find is, do a little half an hour, then I got another hour's worth of work in me because my brain has had a
Mm-hmm.
reset and a clean out from the stress.
Yes. That's brilliant. And that I started to tell leaders if they're doing like a weekly feedback session, even asking 1 to 10, how stressed are you? And you don't want people at a 1 because that means they're bored, but you don't want people at a
Right.
10 because then they're overshooting. And I've heard a lot of young, and I'm interested to see what you think about this, but I've had a lot of young employees tell me, oh, stress is a neutral term. I always thought that if I experienced any stress, that was bad. So then I got stressed that I was stressed. I judged,
Right.
my body being kind of keyed up, and I actually made it worse.
Yeah. And I think if you can talk about, and this is sometimes how I think about it, if you think about this Goldilocks curve, and
Yep.
on the too little side, I think of it as too little stimulation. So
Yeah.
instead of asking a person, are you under stress? Or like, well, is there such a thing as under stressed? I don't want to be stressed.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yep.
where's your stimulation? Do you feel bored? Do you feel like life looks a little flat? Do you feel unmotivated?
Mm-hmm.
And this
Mm-hmm.
is such a great tool for managers because sometimes they're addressing the wrong thing. I have
Yeah.
a story that I love about one of my students who, when we talked about this in our neuroscience and coaching class, he said, we went through this with my son. He was in math class, and they wanted, I think he was like in 3rd grade, let's say, and they were saying he's just not getting 3rd grade math. We need to move him back to 2nd grade. And this dad knew that his son was really smart. And he said, no, I don't think that's the issue. I think there's something else going on. And they're like, well, every
Mm-hmm.
parent thinks their child is special, right?
Well, yeah.
Oh, you're just, of course your child is special. To his credit, took him to an external testing. The kid tested it like, I am not kidding you, 8th grade math. He was bored. And when we're bored,
Oh,
our brains don't work as well. So we don't want to, as managers, assume that if somebody starts, quote, underperforming, it's because we've given them too much or they have a bad attitude. This to me is a better first place to start.
That's
Have you
smart.
been so good at things that they're no longer interesting, in which case you may be now starting to make mistakes, but it's not because you don't know how to do it. It's because it's not bringing you any of the neurotransmitters you need.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So the one question could be, are you bored?
Right.
Do you
Are
need
you
some novelty?
stimulated? Yeah. And I love this quote from Noelle. She said, sometimes you have to take charge and find your own novelty at work. And I think that's around, and Lindsay, I know you talk about this, like, how do you take charge of your own career?
Yep.
And if you're starting to feel like you're flatlining and you're doing the same thing every day, this is critical for your brain. You need something that isn't easy.
You need
Not
to feel
so
challenged.
hard,
Yeah.
right? Not so hard that if you fail, the whole business blows up, but
Yeah.
something, right, is, an appropriate level of push.
What do you think happens to a company or an organization? There's a lot of not-for-profits on here. There's a lot of collegiate organizations. There's some chambers of commerce. What do you think happens when leaders don't pay attention to the heart of any group? What do you think happens?
People leave.
Great. Next question.
Well, I think you get presenteeism or absenteeism. People, it's
Mhm.
like somebody told me somebody who was a horse trainer. I love metaphors, so forgive me if you don't like
I
metaphor.
love it.
I do. So if it doesn't work for you, sorry. But I had a friend who was a horse trainer, and she said, if you push a horse too hard and don't reward them and don't give them a break, they'll do two things. They'll buck you off, or you'll kill their heart.
Wow.
And I think that's what happens in our organization when this isn't paid attention to. By the way, I think also, and Lindsay, you speak to this, because I think there's also this thing about high achievers. You don't even need to be a toxic boss. Sometimes what you need to do is help them manage themselves, because they will burn themselves out.
Mhm.
Does that fit with your experience?
High achievers, there's a lot of elements that create burnout for sure. And actually, disconnection from self and other people are some of the top signs that you are burning out. When you don't know what you're feeling anymore and you're finding yourself just numbing out and avoiding. What high achievers tend to do is they add busyness to their life so that they don't have to worry about like processing and being present with themselves. So when you see somebody just being busy but not being productive, that's a sign that you're disconnected from yourself. And then what you said earlier, neurologically, being connected to each other is critical. That is so important
It's
that we
so
have that, because it does help us neuroregulate. And we are emotional beings. We are relational beings first to do some things. And I think sometimes it's, we want to pretend that we're machines, but we're really like plants. You can't just program us and run us, plug us in and make us run. We need nurturing, we need connection, we need the soil, we need all those things to really
yeah.
flourish. And we're analog beings.
Yeah,
It takes time.
and it gives us, the other thing about it is, I love that you say that, because it also gives us wisdom. So if you think about in any business, if it were just that we could sort of run like robots, what would we lose if we were that kind of person? Well, we would lose insight. We would
Yep.
lose intuition. We would lose a huge amount of creativity and inspiration that comes out of this more fertile time. Even the ability, whoever the customer is, or whoever everybody's got some kind of customer, right? However
Yes.
it is, nonprofit or not, somebody you're interfacing with. If we were all robots, you wouldn't know what they needed. So there's a huge value to being emotional beings. It's not something that gets in the way. It's the fuel for our brilliance. And sometimes
Yes.
it's harder to control, right? So sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it gets devalued.
That's exactly it. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's not a nice to have. It's not and I think that's the turn that I want to see organizations start to take.
Yep.
Paying attention to the heart. It's not a nice to have when we have enough time. Oop, got to cut the budget. Sorry, Chief People Officer. Somebody said earlier, it's the first thing to go.
Yep.
It's critical. And to go back to dying for a paycheck, one of the hopeful things he talks about, a couple of companies in there that do really a good job with this. And he talks about how profitable they are. One of them, at least at the time of writing, was Patagonia. He's a big fan of Patagonia. And Patagonia does things like on-site daycare. And what Patagonia will tell you is it's one of the smartest investments they make, because I'm just getting chills. If you think about what it is, and maybe some of you on here are young parents, with little kids, you think about a certain portion of your mental energy, of your available energy and focus is always going to be scanning for your child, or at various points during the day.
Yeah.
If you've got an on-site daycare and you can go, even if you only have 15 minutes for lunch, you can go spend 15 minutes with your kid. They're regulated, you're clear they're fine. Man, you can go back to work, put more of your mental energy toward whatever it is, designing a new down vest, right?
Exactly.
It's absolutely totally practical. We shouldn't be framing these things as these nice, mushy things that, they're completely practical. More mental energy because I had 15 minutes with my kid. It makes so much sense to me.
That is so humane. And there's so many layers to that, right?
Yeah.
That is not just it's nice to do, people feel cared for. We know that you'll be more productive because that window in your brain, right? It's both. It's really both.
And Carrie's saying, the Chief Human Resources Officer for Patagonia speak and loved them. So I'm really glad that it's still validated. I would hate to see that it hasn't continued on, because they're one of the few companies, the few really international companies that he really likes. And so
highlights.
I hope they're still doing it. But there's a woman that I follow in the neuroscience space. Her name is Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she does this amazing work on emotions. She's the most cutting edge. She's at Northeastern University. She's got a new book out, 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. It's absolutely accessible and brilliant. But the bottom line of what I want to tell you is she says very clearly, we only have so much energy in what she calls our body budget. It's like you only got so much money to spend. And if you've got $10 and 2 of them are going toward worrying about your kid, you only have 8 left to focus on your job, right? And if you can't restore and reboot that body budget, you're just going to have less and less to give. So it's a really practical thing. And I'd love to hear the speaking about this, both from, and I'm hopefully the Patagonia person did, both in terms of this is the morally right thing to do, and it's the most profitable thing you can do. Let's link those.
Yes, that is the connection that you're making. There's a way to do things well and take care of people and make better profit because you're allowing humans to be human. Yeah. I've got a question for you that somebody wrote in.
Yeah, and I was wondering if there were more questions, because are we doing an hour? Are we on for an hour or more?
Yeah, we're wrapping up here in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
So we'll get everyone, if you have a question, this is your moment to ask. But I've got one that somebody emailed in to me. I think this is great. What is the best way individual contributors can make an impact on the organization, a really grassroots effort to push to the top this kind of heartfelt leadership?
Oh, I really freaking love that.
Yeah.
I think you have to find allies. I just getting chills, but I want to point everybody toward a show that unfortunately got canceled after the first season because wrongly. And it's called Good Girl Revolt. Good Girl or Good Girls Revolt. And it's about women who worked at Newsweek in the 60s and were not allowed to be writers. They had to be researchers. And it's about the process of what it took to create allies. And how scared people were, and how people signed on and signed off, and and they were worried, and they were some people who were kind of getting what they wanted and needed, but why should I support the rest of you, because then I'll lose what I want. And it's a beautiful example of grassroots organization of just grassroots organization in an organization. And they ultimately, I think they ultimately got what they wanted. So I think the piece about it is, who already thinks this way? Who already is with me here, and who does that person know, and do they know anybody in power? How do we start? That's, I think, where I would start. I think there's probably other strategies as well. Lindsay, do you have any ideas as well of things people could do?
Well, we've talked generationally about organizations who might typically have older leaders, they've been established, they've been around, is pitching to have a younger board, a real Generation Z millennial board, so that when decisions are being made, there's a formula, there's a group of people you go to and say, we're thinking about making this pivot. What do our young leaders think about that? So again, I like to use the word coalition, but creating, like you said, a grassroots effort means also letting people know what you're doing who are in power, and asking, hey, is this something that you see the value of, that you can support? And it's a slow process. I do think that 2020 shocked everyone into seeing things differently, which is kind of a gift in a strange way. But there's also, what are we actually going to do as a group? And making sure that your needs are known. I think self-advocacy in the workplace doesn't happen enough. And right now it's very common that we're all living in our bubbles. We don't know the other person's stressors. And so self-advocate, let people know, here's where I'm at on the stress, on that stress curve. I'm past where I can really function well. Here's what I need to have different. Here's how I need to change. Things need to change. Even modeling self-advocacy and how to troubleshoot emotional issues. Emotions aren't in the way. They are coming with you. So let's dance with them. Let's dance with our stress and not try to completely eliminate it. So I think those are a couple different ways that you can, wherever you are on the org chart, speak to this.
I really like that. And I'm going to say something else, and I'm going to kind of check out if I mean it while I say it.
Oh, great. I love it.
I think the other angle that you can take is there's still a generation that I believe that sort of thinks that emotions are optional, or there can be a tendency, not everybody, obviously, there's some awake people, but so I think the other way that you can do it is keep sharing the data, keep sharing the research. You don't have to pitch from the heart to people who don't speak the language of the heart. If the language that they speak, and the bottom line, pitch that until they can't ignore it anymore. Talk about the neuroscience research, the Jeffrey Pfeffer research, and saying there are this. So, because I think if we go into this is the kind of company we want to be, and even pitching, we'll attract more people, we'll retain more people, that can feel a little soft. It's like, well, we attract people anyway, we just pay them good, right? But if you talk about, I really want to keep coming back to what the data shows.
Yes.
That's the language that you might, and I think from Jeffrey Pfeffer's experience, you probably are going to have to say it more than once.
That makes sense. And drawing that business case, that really is the job of the chief heart officer too, is to be in the executive level and show the business case for why human emotion, neuroscience, how humans function, and why it's better to work inside of those parameters.
Yeah. And Noelle, you're saying a really good point. It took a pandemic for large corporations to understand telework can work. I consult with a very, very large organization, and man, they have been wedded to, we have to bring everybody together 4 times a year, the millions of dollars. This, by the way, is an organization that is not doing very well financially. And so the idea of, let's look objectively at, when do we actually need that and for what? And when does it work other ways, rather than being so locked into our old bias? And I think a chief heart officer can this is more and more what I'm seeing, Lindsay, is the people who should be in these positions are people who can walk, who can be an oak and be a rose,
that's
and
right.
ultimately be a willow. Willow trading.
That's it. Yes. That's really a good way to say it, to even know when you're going into a meeting. Do I need to be a little more oaky or a little more rosy right now?
Right. And who am I speaking to? And what's the language that they speak?
What's their
And
native tongue?
yeah, because
Yes.
it's the morally right thing. People will feel better. That's absolutely 100% valid. And
Yeah.
it is a better way to run a business. That's 100% valid. So you got to be bilingual at least.
There it is. There it is. I know we only have two, what's that?
This is so fun.
Yes. I know we only have 2 minutes left and I don't want to take more of your time. So I hope that if you had a question, you can always find Ann. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can find us in a bunch of places to chat. I know you've got a lot of cool trainings coming up, Ann, and you've got an awesome blog. You've got so much going on. If you love hearing from Ann, there are a million ways to hear from her. She's puts poems on Facebook all the time. It's fantastic. And with the short amount of time we have left, you've talked to people, like you said, from all different size organizations to private clients. What's one thing that you would love to tell the world right now in this moment? What's one thing you would want everybody to hear?
Everybody, I mean, I think everybody needs some gentleness and understanding. The stress level that most people are dealing with in the past year is an epidemic in and of itself. Everyone's mental health is being impacted, and we got to be really, amp up the understanding. The other call out I want to make, Lindsay, if it's okay, is for your whole community to say, if there's something else that you would love to see me and Lindsay bat around, let Lindsay know, because I love coming on the porch.
I love having you. I know we all do. So thank you for giving us your time. And you have so many, I know we talk all the time about how much we love to read and do research, but being able to come together and share it in this forum is so cool. Thank you all for coming. I know a lot of people are saying thank you in the chat. Some people are asking where to find your poem, Ann.
Yeah, it's on Facebook, I have a page, which is Ann's Angel Poetry. And I'll make sure it's there. If you generally share things to that, and you can follow that page, or it's just on my timeline if you send me a friend request. So
that's great.
But it's Ann's Angel Poetry I put every new poem out there, and I do it almost daily. So.
Yes. It's brilliant. Thank you all. Have a safe rest of your day. Be gentle with yourself and others, and we will see you next time on the porch.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ann. Thank you so much for coming.